Welcome everybody to this week's episode of Incidentally in the News. We're excited to have Mark Bowers back with us, Felix Weiss back with us, and Larry Whiteside back with us. We've got a couple of different things that have come up over the week, but we wanted to focus on one really interesting case today because it's specific to insurance coverage. And as CyberClan has had a lot of experience with insurance, cyber insurance specifically, we have a lot of deep relationships in the insurance industry. This one's an interesting one for us to noodle, given our relationship to the industry, as well as given the cases that we've worked on. So it's Virtu Financial, VIRTU, as a lot of people might have seen. It wasn't a data breach or anything like that. What happened was it was a social engineering attack, a business email compromise where several individuals had gotten and hacked into the executives' accounts and had emailed the chief financial officer in the financial department. And it actually had a total of $10.8 million transferred to banks as a result of those requests. I believe the latest tally has been that they were able to freeze the funds from 10.8 million down to 6.9 million. But where the case gets really interesting, and Mark, I'll probably start off with you to comment on this, is the insurance coverage has come back essentially saying, look, this looks like true human error and we're not going to cover it. And so now this is kicking off a much larger discussion, and knowing how much we want to educate people on cyber insurance and the need for it, I think it's an interesting topic for us to dive into, however carefully and diligently we do that. But Mark, how would you comment on that?
Yeah, it's a bit of a surprising one. Obviously, the detail, as much as the detail has come out, you have to take with a little bit of caution. But what's very interesting is this particular event, 2 wire transfers totaling about 10.8 million. It's a typical scenario you would expect to see covered by a cyber policy, because this would fall squarely within the social engineering cover. And what's interesting is, if what I've read is to be believed, that the insurance company, Axis, has declined cover on the basis that the loss wasn't directly caused by the actual intrusion into the network. So they're saying the causation was the fact of negligence on the part of the employees in the accounts department. Now, it's an interesting position to take, because I would find it very, very surprising if that specific cover wasn't in the policy for this type of event. But it is an argument I've seen once before. And in fact, I was involved in a case here in the UK on this very point, where a couple of employees had failed to follow into procedures before verifying wire transfers. And that really was the break in the chain of causation. And that's what really gave rise to the loss, the failure to follow protocol, rather than the fact that they'd got fraudulent emails advising them to make the transfer. I've not seen it tested in the States before, so it's going to be interesting to see which way this one goes. But right now, I'm probably leaning on the part of the insured, but I would have to see the actual content of the insurance policy to see exactly what's in there. So it's going to be an interesting from a coverage perspective.
That opens up a few different questions. I'll go to you, Felix, first, but then I definitely want to come to Larry, because I think there's on one side, just Felix, can you reiterate to us what business email compromise looks like, social engineering, how it really captures? I mean, from this perspective, it looks like they overtook some of the executive emails. And then just to bridge the conversation, Larry, I think this fits squarely in our risk assessment services, and like this need for education from the board on down to the lowest level employee on not only how to identify social engineering and business email compromise, but then to Mark's point, protocol still needs to be followed and could likely potentially save people from succumbing to the dangers of social engineering. So Felix, could you talk to us a little bit about, reminding us what social engineering looks like?
Yes, thanks, Erin. So basically, social engineering is a very broad concept covering anything where someone gets tricked into doing something that they were not intended to. It usually involves some form of impersonation or anything like that, where the attacker mimics a trusted individual that has the permission and authority to make a specific request to get someone to do that. And that's really what happened here as well, where someone from the accounting team felt pressured by who they thought was the CEO of the company to quickly make a change to a bank account in China, I believe the report says, and then to quickly wire out the funds. And very often they use aggressive language saying that it really needs to happen right now. It's a big business deal depending on it. You could lose your job if you don't do it. And they use all the tricks of the trade for a con man to get an individual to do what they want them to do.
Yeah, it's really wild, Larry. So like when we're sitting down and we're talking with individuals about, doing tabletop exercises, I know that we're looking at it from a holistic perspective, but even then we've called it the human firewall, the need to train up the human firewall. Felix, to your point, if someone can be threatening, how does an individual go, does that really sound like my boss? Would they really normally threaten me? It's surprising how close to mimicking the behavior of the executive they can become so that it fools you. How do you work that out when you're trying to help organizations learn more and be educated about that?
Yeah,
So I think
it's an interesting. Go ahead, Felix.
you go for it. That's okay.
So it's an interesting topic to deal with, right? So first off, phishing is directly playing on the human psyche, right? And when you impersonate an executive, there's this aspect of fear and doom that can come on you as it relates to the consequence of you not doing your job. So people tend to not ask some of the basic questions that they would typically ask in these types of scenarios, right? And so, but to the point that Mark brought up of did they follow the process and procedure that they would normally follow to go through that, right? Do they even have one? And so when we're educating people on how to identify a phishing attack or a phishing email or phishing scams, right? We're trying to tell them a couple of things to what Felix said. Is there a sense of urgency being pushed on you, right? Is that the normal way that you see those things come through? And what you're being asked, is it asking you to do something outside of a normal process that you would typically follow, right? And be able to look at these things. And then some very basic things. Is it utilizing proper grammar? Right? If you got an email from your CEO or your boss or your CFO, and there are words in that are misspelled, do they typically misspell words when they're sending you emails? Like there's little things and little nuances like that that people sometimes overlook because of the urgency associated with what they're being asked to do, and the fear associated with what they're being told to do and its impact on their job. So the education piece is not easy, but it is probably the biggest bang for the buck that people can get in an organization as it relates to securing their environment. But in this instance, to have the insurer potentially say that they may not pay it, or and it may not be covered because they may have fallen, this is a human error. I'm very interested because this could set some precedents that could have huge ramifications across the industry.
Well, and Felix, I have a question for you because I think a lot of people might hear this and say, oh, okay, so these guys came in and one day the behavior was just there, it was threatening or whatnot, but business email compromise isn't usually an overnight thing, right? These guys might have been in the system for quite some time. So of course, then you're looking at the entire cybersecurity posture of the company and where could they have prevented this along the way, right? Social engineering isn't necessarily an overnight thing.
Yeah, yes, that's right. And it's not just social engineering what happened here. The news article mentions that the email account of the executive had been compromised for a few weeks, and that the threat actor or someone had been reading those emails. And that's very important for them to understand the verbiage he uses, understand at what times he's active, maybe even look at his calendar and see and notice that he's on a plane for these hours, so they know that's when they need to execute their attack. So you've got your business email compromise here, which is to a large degree a technical problem, whereas the social engineering is more of a human problem. And that's where their monitoring controls likely failed, where the attacker must have logged in from a new address. They must have used maybe a new mail client. They might have been active at different hours, given that the expectation is that the attacking group is in North Korea. That's very likely that any of those might have happened. And those properties were either not logged, maybe they weren't audited or monitored, or maybe the organization just didn't have the capacity to respond to them in a timely manner.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, I know that we're all sort of, again, given our proximity to the insurance industry and how much work we do to not only educate our clients on cyber insurance and to ensure that they have it, we're all watching this very closely. Another topic that came up that you just mentioned North Korea. They've also been in the news in an attack against Israel that was thwarted, actually. And I, as the Luddite here, would love to ask you all technical folks the question, because what surprised me when I was reading about it is that LinkedIn profiles played a role in how the North Korean threat actor was trying to get into the Israel defense systems. Can you guys speak to that a little bit about how everyday users of LinkedIn, where this video will get posted, need to be thinking about?
I think the only thing I can say about LinkedIn is it does have a history. And I think there is quite a perception out there that their systems are prone to attack, have been attacked before, and a lot of people's data has been taken in the past. How secure LinkedIn is generally these days, I don't know. The other guys are much more experienced to talk about that sort of thing than I am, but I'm not surprised to hear it, is all I'll say.
Yeah. Felix, what about you from a technical Larry, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I'm a heavy LinkedIn user.
Yeah.
I use it religiously. I probably get 30 new invites a day, right, of requests, people that want to connect. And so LinkedIn from a security standpoint, I'm not as concerned about LinkedIn from a security standpoint, because the stuff that's on my resume is basically what's on LinkedIn. So from an information data, not as big a deal. But from a social engineering standpoint is where LinkedIn has some real dangerous value. And if people have been operating under the idea and assumption that LinkedIn, this is surprising that LinkedIn has fake accounts, I'm shocked. Because you have to realize that any tool that has the amount of users and I won't say private, but personal information about an individual, attackers are going to utilize it to try and gain an advantage. That's just what they're going to do. And so whether it is recruiters, whether it is people who want to, say they want to be business partners, one of the things that I do now is pretty much on every LinkedIn request I get, if you do not share over 100 connection requests with me, I do an image search on your image, right? Oh. And I find, and it's unfortunate, but the reality I find is that most of the time, if it's a female that has reached out, there's a large percentage of the time that if the female has under 100 connections with me, when I do an image search on her, I find that image is all over the place. So there's a constant thing, and I talk with a lot of my peers in the industry, and we, in WhatsApp chats and Slack channels, we post these LinkedIn requests that we get from females who are recruiters or want to help and want to do this or want to do that. And 99% of the time, it is some stock image that has been taken from somewhere else that if you just do a quick image search, you'll find it in so many other places.
Wow, that's frightening. Felix, did you have any comment on that particular attack? Because I think you read a little bit more about it. Wasn't just that there was recruiters involved, but they used that to get a job within the system, which then opened them.
Yes, it's so really the information that's out so far is a little bit scarce. It's quite a new article, but apparently they use the recruiter function of LinkedIn to mimic as a recruiter. They would reach out to those individuals that worked at the company saying, hey, do you want a job? We could pay a lot of money. Tell me a bit about what you do, etc., and getting information from them that way, which isn't necessarily a hack or a compromise of technology services, but they are providing information to the threat actor. And this is really just the next iteration of breaking in, and again, social engineering in general, where maybe back in the day, someone would show up to an office facility and said they were the building super or working for the electricity company and just wanted to look around quickly. And then when phone systems kind of came into place, they acted like they were part of the security company, and they just wanted to make sure that they armed their security alarms at how late again? 10 o'clock each night? And it just, now that we use the internet so much, it only makes sense that they would take the role as a recruiter or anything else on the internet, do the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's frightening. It definitely, as like you, Larry, I'm an avid LinkedIn user, and I'm now a little bit concerned about I don't typically, to your point, I don't typically take requests from people that I have literally no connections with. They're under 20 connections or so forth, but I never thought of the image search, so I will certainly put that into practice for myself. And And I just think it's another reminder for us to be really cautious about it. The last stat that I had for us today to contemplate is that today the Wall Street Journal issued a statistic that 191 US healthcare entities have reported data breaches since March 11th, since COVID was officially announced by the WHO. I know we are knee deep in a lot of healthcare conversations. Larry, you've certainly had a long history in healthcare. How dangerous is this that we're seeing such an uptick in healthcare providers being breached?
It's not surprising. You know, the pandemic, right? The pushing of people into remote work environments, the overrun of hospitals with, you know, COVID cases and everything else is a driver of all of this, right? Because organizations are having to operate differently, which attackers find this an opportunity to take advantage of the timing and lack of visibility and focus that they can potentially put on this. So it's not abnormal to me, but also understand that we're in sort of a different world as it relates to reporting. You know, over the last 5 years, the mandatory reporting based on number and impact has really driven up the number of incidents that we've seen get reported. But I think that it's been similar all along. It's just there were so many that weren't reported. So to see that there were 191 with business email compromise and phishing being so widely used, ransomware is hitting pretty much everybody nowadays. It's not an abnormal number for me.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think it's a sector that's always traditionally been a target. And I think that's partly because of legacy kind of operating systems that they have. They tend to be outdated. They're not maintained as well, patching and so on and so forth. Also training. So, you know, I completely agree. It's not a shock to see those kind of numbers. And I think what we have seen more of is a lot of business email compromises, a lot more activity in that space since we've had lockdown. And I think that you can certainly attribute to the fact that a lot of people are remote working, and that has some problems for organisations. A lot of the organisations will say that they've put plans and processes in place. I think there's a lot that haven't, and I think one of the key areas where they're missing and constantly missing is through a lack of continuing education to staff and awareness and simple things that staff can be doing in order to mitigate these data leaks.
Yeah. We must build the human firewall alongside of your technological firewall. We need to make sure that we're helping to educate the humans, because I think it's what 90% of breaches are ultimately on attack on humans. Well, that is all I had for you all today. As usual, we try to keep this pretty short, but any final comments from the team? Otherwise, we'll wrap up another Incidentally in the News episode.
Nope, all good.
I think just on the coverage part, I think the reason why they're probably not going to argue a social engineering cover is because that will be sub-limited. The extent of cover will be appreciably less than the sum issue here. They're arguing, I think, the insured, that it's a computer fraud. I don't think it would fall within that definition, but it's certainly going to be interesting to see how that coverage dispute plays out.
Yeah, for sure. I think that we may potentially start drawing out some of these topics into recap episodes that aren't our Incidentally in the News podcast and audio and video recast, but we will try to dive deeper into some of the updates on some of these cases that we've been looking at. So Mark, I look forward to potentially talking to a few of our colleagues here in the US that are lawyers as well, that are affiliated with the case, and we can keep our eye on that. Again, our team for sure wants to be up to speed on what's happening in that case. So, well, as usual, everyone, thank you for being here at Felix. We're jealous of your not fake virtual background. So enjoy your not fake virtual background. Mark, I hope that lovely conference room fake background is keeping you company.
Online is real, right? We all know that.
Everything you see online is real. Exactly. Well, I look forward to talking with you guys next week on whatever comes up in the news. Thank you again for being a part of this today, and we'll talk soon. Take care.
Great. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.
Thank you.